Live in Atlanta, Gene?
Well, I'm what I call a lifelong resident of Atlanta. I was born in Carrollton, Georgia, which is down in Carroll County. That was my mother's home, and so my mother and father lived in Atlanta, but she went down there to give birth to her first child. Uh, the Just as a matter of background, and you may have already run into this, I wrote a thing, dedication to the Georgia State Law Review, in which I gave something of my background with regard to Georgia State. Have you seen that?
I have not seen that, but I've seen a lot of other things right now. I haven't seen that one
And
yet.
at any rate, this was a dedication in which I took the opportunity to explain somewhat my affinity for Georgia State, and I think it will help understand to some extent what why I was there.
Okay.
Another thing you might want to look at and may not know about is that the Georgia State Bar Journal this past year ran a series of 3 articles on the history of the three law schools, that is Mercer, Emory, and the University of Georgia. I protested at the time that they should also carry a history of Georgia State, but they were somewhat reluctant to do this, and I never did quite understand why. I suggested that they might want to write a history of Georgia State in this series and tie it in with what you might call the history of unapproved law schools in this state, because there's a tremendous connection between the Georgia State College of Law and the I guess you might say the demise of the unapproved schools.
Absolutely.
And incidentally, if you want some more of my own background, Mackey wrote an article in the second volume of the Georgia State Law Review upon my retirement down at Georgia State. So there's that much already available to you. It's also pertinent, I think, as a sort of an introduction to understand that we have had the 3, that is prior to Georgia State, have had the 3 what we call the approved law schools. I'm not sure, and you might want to check this history to see. I think Georgia, the University of Georgia came first, and then Mercer, and both of them were many years ahead of Emory. Emory, which had originated down at Oxford, had a law department as a part of its AB program. In other words, had a major in law, and we did have some graduates who had gone to Oxford and gotten their AB degree and had and with a major in law, and then had gone on to become prominent at bar. The law school at Emory was set up and started operating, I guess, about 1916. And these were very tough times for Emory because this was right in the midst of World War I and its aftermath. And in the early part of the 20s, you had something of a depression, so that you did not, and really it was a struggle for Emory, and really never pulled out of it. And when the Depression came along, and the Depression was a frightful thing so far as the law school of Denver is concerned. I went to law school at Emory in fall of '37, graduated in '39. But it was, of the three schools, it was the last to become established. I was the first to receive any kind of what you might call national accreditation. And the whole history of national accreditation is an aspect that plays in here. But at any rate, as I said, I came to Emory in the fall of '45. I was I guess I came to Emory in around January of '46, and started teaching. And Dean Hepburn was not Dean Hepburn. Dean Hilke was the dean at that time. And then after World War II, and this ties in here, during World War II, you of course, you had a V-12 program at Emory,
Sure.
but the day school ceased operation. I mean, there just weren't students
The
weren't
undergraduate.
there.
Right. The law school or the undergrad?
The
Right.
law school.
Okay.
The law school ceased operations. It had its faculty there, had its library there, had its building there, and so the decision was made to begin offering a law degree as an approved law school in the night evening division, and this plays into it too, you see.
Absolutely.
So they started then, right, I guess, I don't know actually the date, right around 1944, 45, this evening program, and catered to various people that were not caught up in the draft and that sort of thing. And there were a lot of military people who were stationed here that partook of that. So when the war was over, you had and had for several years experience with a part-time or an evening school program, and there was the GI wave, as we speak of it in law school educational circles, the GI wave, people coming back. And so for a bunch of years after World War II, you had record enrollments both in the day division, which reestablished itself, and in the evening division. Then as time went on, we began to run into the situation of the Korean War. and this was rather, had a drastic impact on enrollment in law school, because you had the draft, and you had the reservists being called up and that sort of thing. So you had some years in there around 1955 or so, in which enrollment at Emory was down, and actually had reached a plateau that was about the equivalent of the enrollment in law schools nationally to the plateau of the middle 30s. It was just flat. And of course, what you had then was a general thinking that we had too many law schools in Georgia. And then all the time you had these unapproved schools. Now the unapproved schools, their clout, so to speak, was that the only educational requirements that we had in Georgia was just graduation from high school.
Right.
And then the bar then began to take hold and put in a requirement that in order to take the bar exam, you had to have 2 years. Prior to that time, you had the diploma privilege. You got and the diploma didn't have to be from an accredited law school, just a degree in law.
You could read for the bar too.
Sure, you could you could read for the bar too, take the bar exam. So it was out of a maze, so to speak, of really sort of conflicting positions. The part-time schools representing a general population that had no college education, and then you had we had many students come to Emory Law School and take 2 years and never graduate. The point was that your opportunities were so good at that time that a number of students found it better just to pass the bar and go to work. They didn't worry about the degree. I became dean in 1961, and at that time we had, I guess, 100 students, full-time students, about 100 students in the part-time thing. In the meantime, you had the inflation that set in after the Korean War, and tuition in private schools started going up and up and up, and it didn't go up anywhere like it did in the private schools, and it didn't go up in the public schools, anything like it. And of course this had some effect on the enrollment in the evening division or the night school at Emory. But on top of that, when I became dean, Dean Hepburn had been dean he had become dean in 1950. And he had in World War II, he had been in Washington with the War Production Board, and so when the Korean War came out, they drafted him again, and so he was spending most of the week in Washington and coming back, and this caused some concern amongst the faculty and the students and the university for that matter. And then he had a heart attack as a consequence, I guess, of all this strange situation. He died in 1960, and then in 61 I became dean. When I became dean, I had no particular qualifications. My guess is that I had more support amongst the faculty than anybody else, and those were my qualifications, I guess. And many of the faculty had left. Bob McKay, who later became dean at New York University, had started in the teaching of law at Emory, and Tom Christopher, who later became dean over at North Carolina, came in with Hepburn. But when Hepburn died, they, along with a lot of other, moved on, and we had a pretty desperate situation as far as faculty at Emory. I think we had 8 people on the faculty at that time, and it was very dismal. And so you started in then saying, well, you know, how are we going to make this thing work? And of course, the obvious answer, it seemed to me, was that we had to sort of target a market up in the northeast and north central part of the country. We couldn't compete tuition-wise with the University of Georgia or with Mercer University. And so this meant building a law school at Emory, seeking the caliber of faculty that would receive some recognition in the colleges up east and in North Chicago area, North Central portion. So we started then to an effort to upgrade the faculty. Well, when you upgrade the faculty, your costs run up, and then runs your tuition up. So, but at any rate, we did very well. I started planning the new building because I could see too that we couldn't make a mark on the national scene unless we got a new building. And also came to the conclusion that we could never achieve what we wanted on the national market trying to run a part-time school at the same time. Now this ran counter to my personal convictions about education, legal education as well, because I had always gotten a source of real satisfaction over the fact that we had an evening division, that we did provide an opportunity for people with just as good qualifications as we were getting today. But it was a reality of that situation, that we were going to take advantage of our location in Atlanta and take our association with Emory, which had tremendous recognition, particularly in the medical field and in the theological field. Right. That we had to, we just couldn't let the tie with the evening division hold us back, and so we made the decision to terminate, phase out the evening division. This was about 1970 when we got around to doing this.
When it was phased out, or when it started to phase out?
Well, yeah, there was. I remember at this time going over to Athens. I think it was about the time that Davison was inaugurated as president of the University of Georgia, and ran into Noah Langdale over there, and we had lunch together, and we were just talking about things generally, and I said, you know, Georgia State is a logical place for a night law school. And that's about all I remember. I don't remember his response to it, but the thing was still on my mind, and we were moving it out, and we were doing all right, and so I felt that was may have been the planting of the seed, so to speak, that led to my being called on later.
Had there not been, from time to time, discussion of Georgia State Law School
Well,
dating back quite a number of years?
well, this is so, but this was, I was not a party to any of this.
Right.
This is something that I learned later. For one thing, for example, they were in their business school, had developed an extraordinary library, a law library within the business school. I mean, this was all out of proportion to what you would have expected in a business school to have had the concentration and emphasis that they had on legal materials in the library. And then, too, a second aspect of it was that they had a number of people on the faculty in the business school that had law degrees. And so then when you see these things, and as I said, I hadn't been particularly aware of it during any of this time. My connection up to this time with Georgia State was simply going down there periodically to recruit students. Now, of course, if you look back in this little thing I wrote in the first issue of the Georgia State Law Journal, I had gone to what was the prototype of Georgia State in 1933. I graduated from the Old Boys High School here. I got a scholarship to Emory, $100. And I lived over here in the Highland, Virginia section. And so in 1932-33, I went to Emory on a scholarship. The tuition was $225. I didn't know at the time. I thought I won a scholarship, but it was only a $100 scholarship, so I had to make up the difference. Anyhow, when the time came to go back to Emory, I asked if they could not renew the scholarship, and they said no, they just didn't have the money to do that, and I dropped out at Emory and went down to Dr. Sparks Evening School, which was down on Walton Street. And that, to me, that's a marvelous history. What happened down there during those years. This is a story I don't guess anybody else knows it. Dr. Newton, Dr. Louis Newton, who was a pastor up at Druid Hills Baptist Church, this is my church. Well, at one time, Dr. Sparks was a member of that church. And this was back in the late 29, 30, right in there, 31, something like that. Dr. Newton sat right here and told me this story. He said, when Dr. Sparks was starting up the school at Georgia, what's now called Georgia State, he said he came to my office one day and said, Louis, I'm starting up this school. I don't have much money. Haven't you got some tables and chairs around here that you don't need, we could use to get things going down at Georgia State? And Dr. Newton said, well, I said, George, we'll find something. He said, you get somebody over here on Saturday and we'll find you something. So sure enough, on Saturday, Dr. Sparks himself came up in a truck and they loaded on a bunch of chairs and tables and so on for to take down to, I guess maybe by this time they had that building on Walton Street that the Campbell Coal Company had given them. And so that shows you what I call the meager beginnings, you know.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes that an institution has to be 100 years or so old before it begins to feel proud of its humble origins. In the meantime, in this age of PR, there seems to be a reluctance to acknowledge that, look, you began from nothing, because they want everything to look so good, you see. But at any rate, I went down there and I wanted an A.B. degree because I didn't see any way to go but to teach, and I figured that in order to teach you had to have an A.B. degree, and that Georgia State at that time, or what the Dr. Sparks Eaton School, only degree they gave was a Bachelor of Science in Commerce, and that was just a glorified commercial degree. So I went over to Georgia, and after 3 years down at Georgia State, and took my last year over at the University of Georgia and got my A.B. degree, and then came back to Emory in the fall of '37 and went through the law school there and got through about December '39. But I tell you all that to tell you that I had strong ties to Georgia State all through the years, but I hadn't kept up with it because I had been busy. I did serve 6 years in the state senate during this period too, and this had kept me pretty busy.
Could I ask a couple of questions
Sure.
about that? I know you came in right after the reapportionment of the Senate.
That's right.
And if I'm not mistaken, were you involved in one of the county unit challenges as well?
No, I didn't. I
You
was not
never-
involved in any of the litigation there. They simply, the district court said that this senatorial situation was not constitutional, and so they had a quickie election. And we had a old, what's his name, Bowen, the old defeated county commissioner, put in, and we had the mayor of Decatur put in, and we had a country music singer put in, and the county attorney put in. And I said to myself, I said, hell, reapportion aren't going to mean a thing if we just fill up this position with these old run down and run out politicians. And I was dean at Emory at the time. I went to the university, and fortunately at that time we were on the quarter system, and the quarter fit right exactly into the session of the legislature. And I went to my faculty, and they all agreed to give it a whirl. So I ran and got elected and served for 6 years.
You were associated with the MARTA legislation, if I'm not.
Yeah. I got in on that when everybody else dropped it. It had been defeated in the general election of '62. It was defeated, and I got in on it. There were a lot of other interested people to be in on it. Tried to figure out why we were defeated and how to work around that. And I drafted all of the MARTA legislation as long as I was in the General Assembly. And but coming on back to I stepped down as dean at Emory at the end of the school year. I guess it was '73, and just went back to teaching full time, and which I enjoyed. Now going back, I think what we were having during those years was all of these unapproved schools seeking to expand. They were putting up almost what you call community law schools here, there, and yonder around, and that was beginning to worry everybody.
For
And
the same too many lawyers kind of.
that's right, and two, they had no real standards either for admission or for, I think they finally got it up to where you had to have a high school education. And then they kept working at it, and then they said 2 years of law school, but 2 years of law school, they had no particular meaning because it depended on how the school counted it, and the unapproved schools were counting it close, and we, on the other hand, were having 3 years. I think most all of us were 3 years at that time. And so I think it was true, as I thought about it later, that there were efforts going on at Georgia State to start a law school down there.
I know there was this legal studies program or something like that predated the law school per se.
Well, it was going on within the business school, and then you had this urban center thing come along, and this itself, I think, the criminal justice thing. This all came out, and this was building up in that too. But the thing seemed, and I didn't follow this during the summer of '81. I didn't follow it except just to notice that it was all going on, because a lot of it had gone on in previous years and then it just kind of played out, you know. But for some reason or another, and as I look back on it, I think I know what was up. Woodrow Wilson, Verlin Moore, who had taken over Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson, I should have mentioned this before, Atlanta Law School was founded probably around 1890, right in there. Yeah. And it's the oldest one, and back in those days, a lot of businessmen who later became prominent would go down there and get a degree and go on in business and never did try to practice. Well, I did practice, and they became well known at the bar. The Woodrow Wilson thing started in the early 30s, maybe a little earlier than that. Governor Slayton had been governor, was the prime mover there, and he and Verlin Moore fell in together, and when Governor Slayton passed out, then Verlin took it over. And it used to be down there in it was the Healy building. But at any rate, it moved out here across from the Biltmore Hotel, and tried again to get some sort of accreditation from American Bar Association, and were turned down 2 or 3 times. And I think Verlin probably came to the conclusion that he was moving into retirement, and he felt like that somehow or another this thing ought to be perpetuated. So he was moved then to propose to the regents that he give the Woodrow Wilson Law School to the Board of Regents, and the deal was that the Board of Regents then would set up the Woodrow Wilson School of Law as at Georgia State, and then he was going to give a library which he estimated was worth $50,000, and then he had several faculty people down there that he wanted to be looked after and so on. Well, even so, I at that time didn't pay a bit of attention to it, because to me it was the wrong thing to do. And
The wrong thing to do, meaning to transfer over from this.
it was the wrong thing for Georgia State to get into it. And I just figured two things. One is University of Georgia had always had tremendous political clout in the General Assembly, and I just didn't even raise any kind of a prospect in my own mind. I just couldn't see it happening. It was wrong all as far as Georgia State was concerned. And then lo and behold, the Regents went for it. I had never been contacted
About any of this.
about any of this. I was teaching at Emory. It was about the latter part of September. We were on a semester system. We were already 2 or 3 weeks into the semester. I was teaching a class. It was a year-long class. I had already prompted my students to as to what was coming in the second semester. And I got a call from Noah. He said, "Noah Lang." Well, I said, "Fine, glad to hear from you." He says, "I want to come see you." And I said, "No, don't come to see me." I said, "Anywhere you go, people are going to ask why." And I said,
Hard to miss now.
"Huh? That's right. You couldn't miss no." I said, "Now I'll come down and see you." Okay, we made an appointment. I went down, and this was what he wanted. He said that they would like for me to come down to Georgia State. I said, "Well, I can't do it." I said, "I'm already committed." He wanted right now. I said, "I'm already committed." Oh, he says, "I'll fix that." And he reached over the telephone. And I said, "No, you can't fix it." I said, "Even if the university dean were willing," I said, "I'm not willing." I said, I got my students, and I've got them going. I've tried to whet their appetite and build up the interest. And I said, I'm not gonna leave. And he says, "Well, we got to have you." He said, "You're just the man to do it. You got the experience and the prestige amongst the local bar and prestige in the legal educational circles and so on.
New people in the legislature.
New people in the legislature." And this was a terribly political thing. And he said, "Well, let's see what we can work out." And so we spent a couple of days talking about it.
Just the two of you, or?
Well, I met all the rest of them at the time.
Meaning Harold Davis.
Harold Davis and Miller, Roger Miller, and Joe Ezel, and Bill Suttles, and all that little top group down there. Patrick. And so on. But the discussions weren't, I guess maybe Suttles was in on the discussion. But they promised me the moon, money that I never dreamed of, which they later reneged after we got going, because there was so much politics in here. They couldn't possibly have, so Noah told me, couldn't possibly have me making as much as the dean was making over at the University of Georgia. And so, wouldn't I take a cut? Well, I never have worked for the money, and so that was all right. But here's where the real problems came in. The first problem I knew without ever inquiring that the ABA would never go along with any kind of so-called merger with an unapproved school. Anybody that's been in the profession and at that level would know that. See, what they wanted to do, they wanted the Georgia State to give their people, their students, a degree, and also give them credit for the time they had put into there at the time.
Woodrow Wilson.
That's right. And ain't nobody gonna do that. Nobody gonna do
Well,
that.
isn't it true that the ABA had actually that month reiterated their position on transfer of credits from
Yeah.
unapproved lawsuits?
Yeah. But it was still in there.
In the agreement.
Yeah, it was still in the agreement. I mean, I come to think, here's what and I don't know whether this ought to go in anything, but I'm just telling you, I think that you had several different viewpoints about accomplishing this thing for different reasons. See? I think you had the Langdale and Suttles, the Georgia State itself, had always wanted a law school. They had wanted, and I'll tell you why they wanted a law school. They wanted to displace the business school as the flagship, so to speak, of Georgia State. And they wanted to do this because then, and I recognize this even in my experience down there, those people down there ran the business school and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the central administration. They weren't getting the proper respect. A lot of infighting down there. And they wanted the law school because they'd always wanted the law school. They wanted the law school because they thought the law school would be their law school.
That they wanted something to be a flagship as well as the business schools did.
Well, they wanted to put the business school in its place,
Right.
see?
Okay.
And they never had been able to do it because the whole history of the thing was
Came out
that
of
the
business,
business school
right.
had always been the university up until that time.
That's right.
And they couldn't get them down and get the others built up.
Putting in a law school wouldn't be a step in that direction.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's all they wanted. Now, they did have another goal too. This would come out every once in a while, that they wanted the law school because a lot of law school graduates go into the General Assembly and that gives them some political clout. They never once mentioned the law school in terms of scholarship.
There's more clout and visibility.
That's right. See? Now, and this is going to explain to you how you mesh the goals I would have when I came in with these different viewpoints. See? All right. You go over to the Board of Regents, and this was about the time when all you had over there in the way of blacks was Hill. When it Hill,
Elbridge McMillan.
no, this was before his time.
Okay.
The more famous black in town.
Oh, Jesse Hill.
Yeah, Jesse Hill.
Yeah.
He was on the Board of Regents.
Okay.
I don't think he ever came. But he was,
From Atlanta Life.
that's right.
Let me-
National Labor Relations Board, and I brought him in here to head up a neighborhood law office center.
That's right.
See? And there are any number of prominent black attorneys that would not have gotten in law school anywhere except they got in law school through the program that I started.
So how did this dovetail with Georgia State?
Hmm?
How did this?
Well, I'd say this was one of the reasons for the Board of Regents. They just wanted a law school. They didn't care what kind of law school. I don't think. I wouldn't want to be quoted on that. But this was not their major concern. Their major concern was having an accredited law school to which would be more open to blacks than even this law school at the University of Georgia, which Emory was far ahead of what was over in Georgia at the time. And so I think that was a feature of it all. You had this opposition from the University of Georgia. Take remember his name, the senator from over there.
Paul Brown.
Paul Brown, yeah. Paul Brown, boy, he was adamant against it.
He's the university's representative.
Sure. He was just as if he were representing the university. And then you always had the political clout, or had political clout down there on the part of the unapproved schools. Now, there were a lot of different, and I learned this later, there were a lot of misunderstandings because a lot of my Emory graduates, Stell Huey and a bunch of them, thought that we're just going to have a night school down there. Just a night school. We're going to have a day school. And so when I got into it, I found all these different views all over the place. But the main thing was how to get untangled from Woodrow Wilson. And who was the chancellor at the time?
It was Crawford.
Crawford was a very decent guy. And he felt like that somehow or another, and he knew good and well that it had been Woodrow Wilson's move that had triggered the whole thing. And he felt like that Berlin was entitled to something. And of course I could understand that too. But we couldn't give him anything.
You were going to go forward, gift or no gift.
And so it wasn't that at all. I had a meeting with Crawford and Langdale, just the two, and I said, look, it ain't going to be any connection with Woodrow Wilson. You can't afford, you got enough problems getting a law school from scratch, but you can't hang an albatross around your neck to start with. And I says, I won't touch it. And he says, well, now, how you going to get us out of it? And that was a big problem.
Because there's a contract. I mean, there was a deed
Well,
of gift.
you sure.
Deed of sale.
Yeah, it was a done deal. And of course, I think technically they had something holding it up till it was reviewed by the Attorney General or something like that. And so, by this time I was into it too. And I could have gotten out of it because I was still teaching at Emory and so on, but I was into
So
it.
you had accepted the offer and gotten behind the whole.
Yeah, but before I accepted it, I said, now look, I won't accept it unless we get them out of it entirely. And they said, well, will you get us out? So I drew up a contract with Woodrow. And and it in effect, I forget the terms of it, but it in effect set up a termination date, and would in effect say that the Woodrow Wilson School would be continued as a separate and independent unit of the University System of Georgia.
Oh, of the university system, okay.
That's right. But that it would be administered by the officials.
By Wayne Presley and
No, no,
Herman Moore.
no, would be that the officials of Georgia State would be the officials of the school and would control it and would handle the revenues, the income and expenses, and see to it that all the rest of the students enrolled at Woodrow Wilson would be given an opportunity to complete the course and to receive a degree from the Woodrow Wilson College of Law. See? And then we also did nothing about the books. We did nothing about any of the personnel over there. We did say that we would review the qualifications of their present students with regard to allowing them, at whatever stage they were, if they had the proper credentials, to come in our beginning class.
If they had the proper credentials.
If they had, in other words, they would have.
And in the first year class.
That's
rather
right,
than-
that's right. Didn't give 1 inch. Well, yes, so I mailed that to Berlin, and it so offended Berlin, and I set a deadline. I said, if we don't hear from you by this date, we'll assume that the total deal is off. And it so offended him, we didn't answer. So we were free of that. But on the other hand, there was tremendous opposition over in the General Assembly, and even the dean here, Morgan, he spoke out against it. Baird spoke out against it. The only dean that didn't speak out against it was Mercer. They're the ones that stood to lose the most by it all, I thought. So my strategy then was to lay low. Just lay low. Say nothing. And create no publicity. Make no public statements. Just be at work.
Recruiting, filling up the
Go
library.
right ahead. Just go right ahead with what with our agenda. And the day after the General Assembly adjourned, we put the College of Law up. And the whole idea was to, and I told Noah, I said, just don't say anything. Just leave it be.
How could you bury it so well? I mean, I saw a quote by Tom Murphy in November of that previous year saying it was the utmost folly, and he would try to.
We just didn't respond.
I guess in a way you're protected because the Board of Regents operated on.
Well, that's right. See, Noah kept coming to me. You'd be surprised how many knockdown, drag-out fights I had with Noah. Here was Ralph Baird over there coming out every day almost. He says, go over there and talk to him. I says, that's not my way.
Go over there and talk to Baird.
Baird, yeah. Go over there.
Noah would say that to you.
Yeah. And I said, that's not my way of doing it. See? And every time he met me, he said, look, you got to go over and stop him, talk to him, stop him, tell him. I said, no. And that was Noah's tactic, see?
To patch it up and to come to some sort of.
That's right. I said, just let him go on. Let him go on.
Well, he wasn't keeping it private. Baird was talking about it.
That's right.
He was fighting it tooth and nail.
You had this article in the Atlanta Magazine. Have you seen that article? This guy was down on it, and I went through it all with him, told him all the positive things. Thought here it comes out. No one wanted to answer that. No. We got our work to do. Let's go ahead and have this school ready to open next year.
But you did have the support on the Board of Regents.
We had, well, you had two kinds of support. The Board of Regents had a budget for us, but it wasn't. You see, Georgia State's got these little honey pots all over the place down there. Roger knows all about them, and they can come up with the money if you need it. Yeah, but then when time came to make out the budget, see, I never was consulted. This all had been fixed before I ever got down there. I mean, this so-called budget was already fixed. So, I could get anything I wanted, see, but I didn't really know enough about it. And when we came down later on to make up our budget for the next year, they said, now look, we've already promised them that this is all the money we want to ask for, so you've got to submit your budget in accordance to what has been set up, see? And this plagued me the whole time I was down there. And I understood it. I took a $10,000 cut in pay just to keep me from making as much pay as the dean over at the University of Georgia, because he couldn't afford, he thought, to have it publicized that I was making as much as dean. I should have been making more, because it's damn sight harder to start a law school than it is for nursing alone. But anyhow,
then on the Board of Regents, because I guess they had to vote again to keep it going even after the deal with Woodrow Wilson.
But only on the basis of budget. On the basis, they didn't have to. Now, it was in the legislature, and I never did go over to the legislature. No one wanted me to go over there, and whatever clout I had to pull it down, I said no. Board of Regents is the one that handles the legislature.
Because you were protected.
That's right.
So on the board, I guess Marie Dodd, rather.
Yeah. I forget who else was
Marie
on
Dodd was, who was she?
She's with Ivan Allen here in town, and I saw it that thing the other day. But anyhow, you see what my strategy was. Look, I don't want, we got enough fighting on our hands without me getting in the fight with Paul Brown, or me getting in a fight with Tom Murphy, or me getting in a fight with anybody. And we got a job to do, let's do it. And that's what we did. We didn't. And then the building thing, it worked out beautifully. There was a lot of commotion over there when there was a parking place on the east side. You know, when you go in underneath there, there's a parking place right over there that they took in and made into a part of the library of the law school. I remember old England raising Keenan's letter to the editor about us taking over that parking space. You know, it's the same kind of, it's a short-sighted type of view. I mean, if you got a project going and the project is supposed to mean as much as they thought it was going to mean, then the point was you find a parking place someplace else.
You're describing it as difficult, but in a sense you're also describing it as sort of you knew that it would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, is that right?
Yeah.
You were pretty confident that you had the pieces there, and
This is something that you might look at in the archives.
Mhm.
We had to submit a feasibility study, preliminarily to the American Bar Association.
This is still that fall or early
This would be
winter of '82.
no. See, I went down there in the fall of '81, and incidentally, I might explain. The deal I made with Emory and Georgia State was I didn't want to be on two payrolls at one time, and I said, I'll tell you what, to Emory and Georgia State, I said, I'm going to teach through the 81-82 year at Emory. And Emory will pay me up through December 31st. And then I'll go on the Georgia State payroll January 1, '82. And then I will retire at Emory at the close of '82. I will continue to teach, but I won't be on the payroll. And that's the way we worked it out, you
Okay.
see. And so every morning in the fall, I went down, taught my classes, went down to Georgia State, and then when January came around, I taught my classes, went down to Georgia State.
Okay, but you were saying, you were talking more about sort of getting it through and.
Yeah, because I didn't have a doubt in the world myself that it would go, and it had gone.
Now, okay, the regents, you said, were behind you basically, or there was just splits on the regents.
There were different reasons on the board, you see, and I remember this, and Paul Brown it was on the floor of the Senate. I didn't even go over there. It was on the floor of the Senate, and he tried to amend the appropriations bill to say that none of the money, the appropriate the university system would be used to establish a law school, and this was voted down.
How did you get the votes on that? Or
I didn't. I don't know.
Who helped get the votes on that?
But I didn't get into it.
Okay.
Georgia State has its group. I forget what they call them, alerts or something. They send out things called alerts, and I left it up to them.
Now, what about this feasibility study you were talking about?
Well, if you want to get a good view of my thinking at that time, then it's in this feasibility
Yeah,
study.
well, now, I gather the speed that all of this took place was a lot faster than Arizona State or City University of New York or some of the other places where they had done a lengthy feasibility study and spent years studying it and so forth. This was more.
Well, we had deadlines. We had to have students there come September '82. We had deadlines. Now, you got to hire faculty. I remember the day, it was around October 1st. They gave me a key to that office. It had been Ed Hughes' office. I don't remember, but there was nothing in it but a desk and a table over here. And I went to Joe Ezel and I said, Joe, I want a good secretary. I don't want somebody that's trying to get rid of. I can't fool around at all. I don't have time to train anybody. I can't try somebody out and then get somebody. I want the best one. And he gave me Mary Robertson. She was it. And she and I, and then there was one other young lady.
Nancy something.
No, Nancy Johnson was
No, not Nancy Johnson.
a little red-headed. I could recognize the name if I ever saw it, and I've been trying to think of it. You've got any kind of an early,
I may have that somewhere.
she was great. she was a student. And she was great, and I ought to remember the name. I would like to have her name.
Okay, well, I can probably find that.
Anyhow, the three of us, and I got tremendous support. Harold Davis, everybody, no questions. I mean, they were all, there wasn't anybody.
There was some sort of ad hoc advisory or planning committee, wasn't there? And what did they do? What did you do? So how was all of that divvied up?
That was all window dressing. This was what you might call a group of lawyers around town that were lent a certain amount of prestige just to have them listed as in support. They didn't do anything. It was just window dressing.
It was basically yourself and Mary Roberts and, you know, the people out of that office.
Now then, when we went down there, you had, in addition to the problem with Woodrow Wilson, you had something of a problem with regard to members of the faculty of the business school who had law degrees and who wanted to come over and be on the faculty. And one young lady particularly, I won't call her name, she was adamant. And what's the name? Catherine, that was a vice president at the time, in charge of affirmative action. She says, you gotta hire her. And I says, I'm not gonna hire her. She said, we'll be sued. And I said, well, I can't think of a better case I'd want to be sued on. And I says, there would be one thing would come out of the case, and that would be that we stood for something. And I said, that's the best publicity we could get, so let us sue.
Were you given a pretty much a free rein by Harold Davis and Noah Langdale?
Yeah. I told Noah Langdale a dozen times, I said, you need me worse than I need you.
And so, you know, as far as that was concerned, he laid off, you're saying?
That's right. He wasn't a bit of problem with it. He kept coming back on this thing over with having the heirs. I just told him one time, I said, look, you got your way of doing things, I've got my way of doing things. That's not my way of doing things. I says, he's over there, I'm just gonna let him dry on the vine. Say nothing to him.
What about external fundraising? Because you were operating under what obviously was an inadequate.
Well, I made speeches all around. Different civic clubs, different alumni groups, and so on. But at that time, I didn't worry about the fundraising. I took it that they were committed, and that my business was to get the law school going.
So they handled more of the outside.
That's right.
I saw there was a fund set up very early on, after the August decision of the board to set up, you know, some fund within the foundation and go forward.
That's right. But I left that up to them. You know, you can't do it all, and I had things to do. Now I did do this. You had all this this affirmative action problem that I mentioned, but you also had this thing that's become a rather prevalent thing that it didn't say so in so many words, but there'll be no dean who by himself hire faculty and so on. You got to have a committee. See? Well, what was I going to do for a committee? Well, I just went over to the business school and picked out a bunch over there that had law degrees and let them be my committee. And then I went to Ralph Russell and I said, Ralph, I want a committee of librarians to interview my librarian and the people that apply for the librarian thing. And so everybody that was brought in was interviewed by a committee. And we went through it all, and then we picked our people. I scrambled up, I still think, an outstanding group of people from all over. I took only one Raylan Neer from Georgia State. I don't Ray over here, former student of mine. But through personal contacts. You see, what they got in me, and I'm not bragging, this is the realistic, they got what you might call instant credibility when they got me. They got instant credibility with legal circles, legal educational circles. They got instant credibility with me with respect to the local bar, both with regard to recruitment of students and with regard to placement of graduates. Right. And that's all right. This is why I felt like I could do the job. I had credibility with judges. I could pick up the phone and call Albert Tuttle. I could phone Frank Johnson over here and Ben Johnson. Would you consider coming over and making a talk to our students on law day and so on?
You have practiced with Judge Tuttle.
Tuttle and Brother.
Sutherland, right? Yeah.
Back in the early
40s, right?
Yeah, early 40s, yeah.
I hear the names of people like Luther Alverson and others. What role did they play, if any, in all of it?
Well, this came up the other day somewhere. I don't know where. So much of any institution is PR. There's something that's anti-PR if one person appears to be the strong leader.
Right.
See? So what do? They go out and they get just a bunch of people. And these bunch of people, they've got more to do than they can handle themselves anyhow.
Right.
See?
Sure.
And that's all. Well, I don't want to say that publicly. I saw Alverson, had a nice long talk with him at this meeting the other day when Dean Girth was introduced. Nice talk with him over there. One good friend of mine. I can tell you some stories about it you wouldn't believe, but then the point is that we're good friends.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to say, and Cliff Oxford, they were supporters.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like I said, when this made them mad down there one time. Came up with they quoted me and said something about like this, said if anything's got to move down here, I've got to move it. Hell, that rank little Noah. But that was the truth.
Right.
I was the one that was watching that deadline down yonder.
So you all had made the decision right away that you needed to get students in there the following September,
Sure.
within a year.
That was
you
set.
couldn't wait 2 years or
No.
a year and a half.
No, we had to have results. We had to have the right kind of results, and we had to have them at the right time. And the right time was the first year after all of this had happened.
Now, what about building up the library itself?
Well, this was an interesting thing. I tried first and went several places to see if I couldn't buy a library.
Right.
But it didn't work. It was junk. The stuff that Woodrow Wilson offered was junk. See? And so I came away and put it to Noah and the rest of the people that if we could move essentially what the business school had down there, and we could get some goodly allotments of money for the library, that we just build our own library.
They had tens of thousands of volumes already, or some large number of volumes.
Yeah, it moved along very well.
Then I saw something, the library club, the legal library club gave you a donation of books, the Lawyers Club Library.
Yeah, well, I established contact with a lot of lawyers and let them know of our need for law books. And you see, lawyers, they've got space problems.
Not just
Space problems, and these law books, they can't hatch out like rabbits, see? And they get to a point where and I go to them and say, look, we're just right down here. Just put them down there, give them to us, put them down there, you've got access to them.
Didn't Henry Bowden give a gift of some?
I don't remember. But that, when we got books, we spent a lot of money in getting books. Now there's a lot of story in on the accreditation thing.
No, that was the next point I was going to raise. Yeah.
We got our accreditation, and there's a good story in that. We had to send in a self-study for the accreditation thing.
Yeah.
And then we had to have this group in, and by that time we were well into our new quarters, and they looked beautiful. I mean, really, we had done a phenomenal job, if I say so myself, but it wasn't me because the university had all planned this beforehand. I never could get any sort of commitment out of the ABA people as to what they wanted in the first place.
They're coming in sort of right around the time that you come on board. I know, what's his name, the fellow from Florida State. Slagle.
Yeah. But they never, you see, they weren't the people we wanted a commitment from. They were sort of consultants to us. What we wanted was this fella Jim White,
Right.
who is really one of the rather bureaucratically inclined and would never make a commitment about it.
And he was from the ABA Committee on Legal Aid.
He was what was called a legal advisor, legal consultant to the section on legal education of the American Mind. And he never would. And we went over our plans with him. We submitted our plans in connection with our feasibility study. We submitted our plans completed, the stages completed as the stages were to be completed, just as we had planned. And went out to
Las Vegas.
And when I got there, I'll tell you this story. I got there and late in the afternoon, and I says, I got to get in touch with whoever is and find out who has charge of our application. And I found a judge, a lawyer from up in, I think it was Oregon. And so I called him up and went in to see him. He said, we really got too many law schools. I mean, he had his mind all made up. And I talked with him for 2 hours and decided, gosh, something's got to come in. So next day we had the meeting, and all the members of the committee were sitting there. And I said, the only way I can win this thing is to keep him from talking. And so, boy, when they opened up and called on me, I hit it right on into it, and I bet I talked for an hour and a half, and he never got started. And then the other guy there was the guy that had been in charge of the inspection committee.
Okay.
And he got in behind me still before he could get going. See? And so, and that's the way we got it.
That was midway in that first year after the school had started. It was February of '83, is that right? Or
Well, that's
August?
right. You see, we started it was after the first year. You can't.
Oh, it was in August after that.
That's
first
right.
year,
You have to be in existence for a year.
Right. That's
And then in August, the thing comes up. Now, later on, see, when I went in there, I ran into mandatory retirement at June of '85.
Right.
And then in about April '85, I came down with endocarditis and was over in the hospital. And taking this IV stuff, I don't know, 6 weeks, 4 times a day, 6 weeks. And during this time, we had had the final inspection. And then the report came down. And this was to have been the final inspection, and they came up with all this stuff about this, that, and the other. One of which was a physical plant. We actually, what had happened was that we'd gotten off too good a start. And then second, we had made an assumption, and I had made the assumption, that we could get by with compact shelving. I mean, the storage of law books was a real problem, and actually I had them, they originally scheduled a floor in their library as a 4-inch floor, and I made them do a 6-inch floor because of the older weights of them. We put in several $100,000 worth of compact shelving, which, as far as I'm concerned. And then we also shifted over to a lot of microfiche.
Well, I gather you were a proponent of microfilm and microfiche.
Yeah, because there's no sense in all these books standing in there when you can, there's no problem to put them on microfiche. But anyhow, that didn't run well with the, you see, we got another association of law librarians, and that's, unfortunately, the section on legal education has left them to run that, and they are all stretched out on protecting their turf, and so they protect their turf by wanting hard copies and less of microfiche, and then they want all this space, and then you got to be able to anticipate enough space for 10 years acquisition down the road and all that kind of stuff.
I vaguely remember actually when that was brewing.
And actually, I just say this, I think that the accreditation committee went beyond its legitimate scope, because any time after the first year, we were in better shape than 50% of the law schools in this country. Better shape. See? And yet they would not give us full accreditation. Now, what they were doing, Noah Langdale had, and I wasn't there at the time, in some of these second and third meetings, went in there and said, in effect, we'll do anything. And by golly, they said, well, okay. We'll make you
jump through this hoop.
That's right. And that's why it took so long.
But it was through the end of that first graduating class, right? The 85, or was it after that even? You said you were.
Oh, it was after that.
It was after that.
As a matter of fact, it's only been a couple of years ago. They, as a matter of fact, all this new building, see, they went on up to the what, the 4th and 5th floor,
Right.
something like
Right.
that, and then got tremendously better than we ever would have gotten. I just don't like for people, and I guess maybe it's because I had set goals and I accomplished those goals, but they didn't give me what I thought was to be the recognition. But I have to admit that when it was all done, it was a good deal for the law school.
But it was sort of like being in limbo, you're saying, because they never would let you know.
That's right. And of lawyers, I mean, law-trained legal educator, you don't expect that. There's an integrity there, to me at least, that you will lay it out, and then if you meet it, you'll get your reward.
Somehow this has reminded me of another issue I know was at work right before the law school, was that you were hired as, quote, interim dean, and there was some...
I remember that. It never bothered me. I don't remember what that was all about.
Okay, rather than a permanent dean, and then
Yeah.
after the first year, I guess there was the search.
I think
and-
that had to do with some Board of Regents thing or something. You know, one of their rules about something. You see, I didn't have tenure. I had tenure at Emory,
Right.
but I didn't have tenure. Now, after the first year, I got tenure because that was they give you so much credit and so on and so on.
Yeah.
At Emory, I've hired people and give them tenure coming in.
Right, sure. But that's the Board of Regents, the
No,
university
they're
system.
not gonna do that.
Right. I'm well aware of that one. How did you go about, I guess, I mean, from what I can gather, the accreditation issue was paramount. The biggest obstacle was the Woodrow Wilson thing at the beginning, or perhaps the biggest obstacle, and you felt that really needed to get behind you as soon as possible because you're going into the recruiting season for faculty.
Right.
And I saw some quote of yours saying the meat market's about ready to open and we have to be there.
That's
and
right.
I was curious what kind of considerations went into your selecting the first faculty.
Well, I tried to balance it out in the sense of I was trying to get faculty that were demanding. I was trying to get what you call seasoned faculty, but seasoned faculty can be, at the same time, they can be conservative. You've got to have a certain liberal element and I have always been genuinely interested in faculty governance. Now I know the downside risks of that, but I think it's a risk you have to take in order to get the people you want. Now there may be a day of reckoning down the line somewhere,
But in an institution that's getting off the ground.
That's right. That's right. You have to make them feel that they've got a hand in building this institution because I knew that my days were numbered and theirs were to continue. And therefore they had to be brought in order to carry on with it.
And I gather you wanted an emphasis on veteran teachers.
I had to have because I couldn't take chances. Now I took some chances. One was with regard to a black.
Linda Chastain.
Yeah. And this served its purpose. I'm not commenting. I think she did her work well, but I think it was a hasty decision on her part to go into legal education, and she later got on out of it. But it served the purpose there to start with.
Did I hear that Gordon Joyner,
Well, Gordon Joyner came down, and I offered him a job. But he told me about his political aspirations, and I said, I'm sorry. I said, if we had been in business here for 10 or 15 years, I said, I would have no objection, but I said, we're starting. I can't afford to have this diversion of your attention.
so you wanted dedicated teachers who
That's
had
right.
been in the classroom.
That's right.
I know a friend of mine at that time got accepted for a teaching position at Emory with no prior teaching position, but did not get the teaching position at Georgia State because he hadn't taught before. You know, and
I just had to have I had to have teachers that had had some experience. And I say I didn't go for that absolutely. Linda Chastain, she had excellent credentials. She was black. She was a woman. I needed blacks on the faculty because I mean, this was a thing that I was trying to build up some rapport. You see.
you were committed to that. Yeah.
That's right. And but I wanted, and I got some good ones. I got good teachers, and right off the bat, our record on passage of the bar was phenomenal, and it's been that way all along.
I guess it's kind of a parallel thing with the original curriculum. You couldn't take chances.
That's right. That's right.
So what was some of your thinking in sort of developing the curriculum too?
Well, first place is you start out, your curriculum, a lot of your curriculum is developed around the interests of the faculty, and until you got a faculty, you don't know what it's going to be like.
Although I saw this brochure that was printed up in the early part of '82, I think before faculty were really on board.
Well, you know, I simply had to guess. This, you know, you get a certain amount of experience of things that are more current at a particular time than another. So, but there were plenty of loopholes in there, or disclaimers, or ways out to say.
Just looking at that original curriculum, it looks as if it was one that wouldn't have caused any adjustment problems to faculty members because it was common, fairly conventional.
That's right. Just pretty
You could
much
step right in there, in other
thing,
words, and not.
That's right. But it was a great experience for me. I had some of the same problems with Emory. I told you a while ago when I went to Emory. We had not had a dean for 18 months when I went to Emory. The dean prior to that had been ill and had been working in, so that actually you could almost say that the administration of the law school had been shot by different forces and factors in there, and so it was almost a start over situation.
This is when you came in as dean.
At Emory. And then I got to seeing that we had to have a new building,
How did you deal with this situation of the two-tiered program at Georgia State, the night students and the day students?
Well,
So you're
we
thinking
had experience with that at Emory. You see, we had it was not till 1970 that we terminated that. So we had experience from let's say 46 to 70 with regard to that. See, now there are a lot of my notions that have changed, and this is because there's always been, and I guess always will be, differences is whether the quarter system is better than the semester system. I've always maintained that the quarter system is best from the standpoint of the students. The more testing they do, the better students they're going to be and the better prepared they're going to be. And on the semester system, and you also find out something about the students quick enough to do something about it. On the semester system, you can't find out, see? And they can be lost before, particularly if you're hard graders and if you've got demanding requirements for graduation. You've got to move fast. And I think the quarter system is, but the semester system has come in because basic faculty members control, and so they get the semester system. But I think but that'll always be that way.
Right.
And then I have never been a strong one for all these clinical courses. But here again, I put my views aside because I wanted to develop, from an institutional standpoint, some connection with the prosecutor's office here and the district attorney's office here, and so on and so on and so on. And so we accommodated with what the students really like. Now, student, in my opinion, does himself an injustice by loading up with clinical courses, because you're going to practice law the rest of your life. Why not get something substantive in there at the time when you got somebody that can lead you into it and out of it? But no, the students like this clinical stuff.
But you didn't have any clinics at the beginning, did you?
Not at the beginning, no. No, we had what we call research writing and advocacy, which was a kind of a clinical thing. But that was basically in there to help the students handle what they needed to handle while they were still in school. That is, write final examinations and so on. That's what that.
How do you go about selling a school that hasn't been built, that it has next to no funding, that's in this tempestuous political situation and so forth and so on, to faculty members, to prospective faculty members? You know, how did you, say, recruit Lynn Hogue or Jim Bross or?
Well, you know, I don't want to say it, but I think this is truth. They believed in me. They believed in what I'd done to them.
So you could point to that
Sure.
and say, look, I built up a night law school,
That's right.
supervising an unconventional law school, and this is going to be.
And I've tried to make that clear. See, I've learned from experience that if you take a faculty like you want and make them demanding and good, that they're going to want to get rid of the evening division.
That they want to get rid of it.
They're going to want to get rid of it. Because there's not a faculty member over there anywhere that will believe that part-time education can travel with full-time education. But every time I said, now damn it, this has got to be here.
This is at Georgia State or at Emory?
No, at Georgia State.
At Georgia State, okay.
I said, don't get it in your mind at all that you can ever be rid of the evening division. This is constitutional with us.
At the beginning of the school, was there any difference between the night students and the day students, you know, in terms of background or whatever, and has that diverged? Has that difference gotten greater over time?
No, I think the evening school people were somewhat older, and somewhat more concentrated. They had learned, because they had been out in business, they had learned how to use their time much more effectively than the students right out. And this makes up for a lot in between the two. An amazing thing is that on working on the law review, which is a time-consuming thing, that you had part-time people that came right on in there and did well, even though it did take the time.
Well, that's part of Georgia State as a whole, beyond the law school.
This. You go back and read that little thing that I wrote in that first thing, and my implication, at least caution, is that we never lose sight of the fact that we are an urban institution, and that an urban institution should measure excellence by a standard that's not limited to simply academic excellence. It's just got to be a broader outlook for notions of excellence. this is what, and I was saying that to say with regard to the law review. See, don't get so damned uppity that you can't take in the writings of what you might call these lesser people around here. They've got to have an outlet too.
I gathered that once things passed the Regents and the General Assembly, the place was flooded with phone calls from would-be applicants to the school.
We had, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. If you could get the figures from Emory or any place else, they've been right up there. Of course, we did a lot of recruiting. I made many trips all over the state to the colleges. Because you see, I didn't want it to become Atlanta's law school. I didn't want it to be an urban, I wanted it to be a law school for the state.
Now, was that a political consideration in light of the Board of the General Assembly to show that there were people from so many counties in Georgia who...
It's always a political situation, but it's also an educational thing, because they've got to understand these people from Southwest Georgia. They've got to, they may eventually wind up in Atlanta anyhow. This is a way you can come, get a legal education, find out what the urban life, go back to Donaldsonville if you want to, or stay here. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Absolutely. I think let's